Okay, so now we are good to go. Let me welcome all of you to this evening's public lecture, which is going to be delivered by our friend, Professor Joe Nellis. Professor Joe Nellis is a professor of global economy and deputy dean of School of Management at Cranfield University. And I call him our friend because it is exactly what he is to us, those of us in the business school, and perhaps a friend of Ghana. He specializes in global macroeconomic analysis and policy, business, environmental analysis, and strategic thinking for managers. He's also the deputy dean, like I said, and the longest serving member of the Cranfield School of Management's executive board. He comes with a lot of experience. He has previously served as the director of the school and the pro vice chancellor of the university. He has held visiting professorial appointments at various universities in Germany, in Belgium, in Austria, in Netherlands, in Hungary, in the US of A, and of course in Ghana. He's been with us on many occasions. He has published at least 19 research and subject-based books and over 200 academic and practitioner journal articles. He's an experienced contributor to a wide range of national and international conferences, and is a consultant to many organizations in the fields and areas of strategy and business environmental analysis, strategy formulation, and management development. Like I said, Ghana is his second home. So he is a Ghanaian, pure and blood. And we have just loaned him to the UK to stay there a bit. So he comes to Ghana very often. And his visits to Ghana perhaps dates back to many years before some of us actually were born. Because as far back as the 1970s, he was already enjoying the regions of Ghana. And I am really excited that this evening he agreed to speak to this very, very important subject of COVID and the related stuff. So he will be talking to us on prospects for the global economy in the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to try and take away the wind from the sail of the very experienced speaker and scholar. Prof. Nellis, welcome back to Ghana. You have, in this lecture today, a broad and cross range of people, like we said. I can see Lawyer Kofi Edulabi, who is a very old and experienced lawyer and writer. He's such a prolific writer. And I know there are across, but so many people here who, if we had opportunity to introduce, we would be able to see the broad range of expertise. So let me not waste any more time. I hand over to you, Professor Nellis. Take over, and we are all ears to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And just to say, first of all, to everybody, Wezo, if you're from the Volta region, you'll understand this very well. I am absolutely delighted to be here, and I see Kofi Adulabi. I'm Kujo, he is Kofi. I'm a Monday boy, he's a Friday boy. But it really is an honor to be here. I didn't hesitate to say yes when Professor Abor invited me, my very good friend who I've known for a long time as well. It is a great honor. It might be helpful to give you a very small bit of background, just a context. As the Prof said, I was a VSO teacher in the Volta region in St. Paul's Secondary School in Denu, 1976, 1978. Interesting times for Ghana at that time. But they were, without doubt, the two most formative years of my life. There's no question about that. They have changed my life. And everybody who knows me anywhere in the world knows about my link with Ghana, and I'm very proud of it. I'm very happy. I've got deep roots with a particular family in Ghana, the Vortia family, Sylvanus Vortia and Mike Vortia. And in fact, on March the 14th last year, my wife and I were due to fly to Ghana on that day, but on the day before, my children said, don't go. The pandemic was just beginning to explode. And so we canceled our flights. We were due to travel to Aggregate on the Volta River. And I would hope that somebody on the line today will visit Aggregate any day. Go there tomorrow if you wish. You will see the most beautiful nursery school, which my wife and I have built. We were due to officially open it on that trip, but it's absolutely beautiful. And we're going to be there as soon as possible. So Aggregate Nursery School, I won't show you photographs, but the old nursery school was literally a mud thatched hut. The new one is a beautiful 21st century facility with projectors, computers for nursery school kids. So, but the Vortia family deserve most of the credit for this. They are from that village, Aggregate. Their mother lives in Agadome with the father, but they were originated from Aggregate. And I'm so proud to be associated with them for the last 45 years. It's wonderful. So let me go now to the topic this evening. I'm going to share my slides, and let's make sure we get this correct. And you should be seeing, I hope you're seeing the first slide. Is that right, Prof?
Yes, please. We are.
Okay.
We are. So now, we have a beautiful picture.
Perfect. I've got a little change I'm going to make. This was the original first slide that I created, and I thought it looks so miserable. It looks so negative. And having just had my first jab of the Pfizer vaccine last week, 2 weeks ago, I'm feeling much more optimistic. So I decided to change the first slide to this one. This looks much better for obvious reasons. We can all begin to at least think about recovery from this pandemic. At least I hope the world recovers. I was also very pleased to hear that I saw in the news Ghana was the first country to get the first batch of the COVAX shipment. And that was terrific news. I hope you get many, many more doses of the vaccine. Although you're also fortunate that you haven't had the same number of deaths as other countries. The UK is not doing very well. But nevertheless, let's be positive. So the purpose tonight is to give you, well, the most up-to-date assessment of where we think that the global economy is heading, given that this is the worst crisis we've had for, many decades. And it really, is a very unclear future. As I say, the vaccine is going to be the secret of success if we can get the rollout of the vaccine accelerated around the world. So in terms of content, I put together a story, and also a number of questions will pop up deliberately. How long will the global recession last, and how deep will it be? And of course, for some countries, it has become a depression. Brazil, for example, has not done very well. As I say, not every country has suffered to the same extent. Certain regions of the world have been least affected, and I'm going to mention those, in particular China. China has done remarkably well economically, as well as they've dealt with the virus effectively as well. Of course, some other regions are most negatively affected, and sadly, as you will know, that's some parts of Africa and Asia and Latin America, sadly. But I'll explain the reasons for my views on this later. I think we should all stand back and reflect on what has happened and what the implications will be for international trade relationships in the future. I've got a particular view on this associated with the recovery of China, which I will discuss in some detail. And of course, I think there are long-term implications here for sustainable growth. The sheer cost of this crisis, the scale of government debt in many countries of the world, particularly in Europe and USA, including the UK, is immense. We'll be living with the financial consequences of this crisis for many, many years. simply because of the amount of debt that has been taken on board by governments. I'm sure you've got many questions, and at the end, I'm going to leave some time for some Q&A in case you've got something you want to say. So without further ado, let me just give my apology up front. I think this is a very difficult time for prediction. Prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. The Nobel laureate in 1922, Niels Bohr, said this, and it's never been more true than it is today. Forecasts are changing regularly, depending upon the scale of the pandemic in different parts of the world, and depending on the rollout of the vaccine. So a bit of economics for everybody. If you haven't studied economics before, well, you're going to learn something. But I thought I would give you a classic MBA type assessment, just a couple of slides, that's all. First of all, this crisis, Michelle, if you can put your phone, Michelle, if you can go on mute, please, that would be very helpful. So the pandemic has hit the world on the supply side and the demand side. The supply side shocks have immensely disrupted global supply chains. I can remember when the pandemic started that Jaguar Land Rover were literally having to carry suitcases of key fobs from China to the UK just to have those particular devices. Global supply chains came to a halt in many cases. There's also been a sharp decrease around the world in available labor supply for several reasons. Quarantines have meant that people are not supposed to go out of their homes in many countries. Social distancing has made it very difficult to run businesses which require physical contact, and lockdowns. The UK is still in a lockdown at the moment. We are not supposed to go to work unless you cannot avoid it. So all universities are in lockdown. We are working from home. Many businesses have been locked down and are not open. The lockdown will start to be eased in the UK, for example, on March 29th. And we expect full opening up of the economy, subject to the pandemic, subject to the vaccines, on June the 21st, still a long way off. So it's going to be 18 months of not total lockdown, but severe lockdown. And we've seen a tremendous fall in business confidence, which is not surprising. How many companies, in various parts of the world are going to be willing to borrow funds in the capital markets to invest in their businesses when they don't know what the future looks like? This is not surprising. So the supply side shocks have been immense. And of course, we've had shocks on the demand side. Just as we've had a fall in business confidence, we've had significant falls in consumer confidence because people really are worried about their future prospects. They're worried about the disease, about catching it, and about whether or not the policies that are in place to help economies, whether or not they will work. For many workers around the world, there's been a tremendous increase in unemployment. In the UK, for example, our unemployment has gone from 3.8% 13 months ago to 5.1%. We expect it to go to over 7% by the end of this year. Again, all subject to those issues I mentioned. We've also seen, again, across the world, an increase in precautionary savings. Not many people have gone on holiday overseas. The sale of cars has gone down sharply because people aren't traveling very much. Hotels have closed down in many parts of the world. Restaurants have closed down. Cinemas have closed down. Bars have closed down. So not in every country, but in many countries. And the consequence is that people have retained their hard-earned income and kept it as savings. Of course, if they've lost their job, they've had to use their savings as well. But there's been a buildup of precautionary savings. Now, the good news is that when the virus starts to recede and when the vaccine rollout accelerates, we're expecting to see a significant upturn in consumer spending. Pent-up demand will be released, but that's not going to happen just yet. At the same time, we've also seen a fall in investment spending by companies as a result of the fall in business confidence. So in terms of standard national income accounting, consumer spending has gone down, investment spending has gone down, and we've relied on government spending. And international trade has also slowed down. So these are huge factors, the like of which we've not seen, by the way, in our lifetime before. To put that into the classic aggregate demand, aggregate supply diagram, and I've simplified this for the non-economist. The vertical axis is the price level, the horizontal is economic activity, GDP. So, last February, March, we started at a level of economic activity of Y1. And what we saw were supply side and demand side shocks. So we saw a sharp reduction in production as companies closed down, quarantines and lockdowns. As companies were closed down around the world, we then saw a sharp fall in demand, investment spending and consumer spending. And as demand fell, and more companies were hit hard in terms of loss of sales. And of course, as they were hit hard, so demand fell further. And the consequence is we have just seen in the last 12 months a deep recession globally, not in every single country, but in many countries. And you'll look at the graph very carefully. You'll notice that, the price level it has not gone up very much. In other words, we've had a recession that has also reduced inflationary pressures as well. Now, that's the sort of standard economic explanation of what has happened. I want to go into this in a less academic way and much more about, what's happening in the business world, what's happening in the world today. We've had also a loss of economic surplus. There's been a big drop. Profits have gone down, incomes have gone down, consumer surplus and producer surplus has fallen. It's going to take a long time to recover from this. The irony is that, ending this crisis is not going to be a big bang effect. It's going to be a slow process rather than a single event. And of course, not surprisingly, ending the crisis is going to be directly linked to the health impact. As the number of cases of the virus peaked during last year, so the economic downturn reached a trough. But as those cases of the virus come down, so we're going to see economies opening up gradually. 2021 will be the year of recovery, subject to the virus behaving itself. Let's try and make sure it does. We need everybody to work hard on this. The global policy responses have been unprecedented, certainly in our lifetime. We've seen around the world, governments have done whatever they possibly can to avoid a global economic depression. It reminds us of the Great Depression back in the 1930s, but hopefully we've learned lessons since then. But the responses really have been remarkable. The USA and the EU governments alone, just those two governments alone, have already committed around $10 trillion. You may have heard just the other day, Joe Biden has signed off $1.9 trillion recovery plan on top of what was spent already. And there's going to be much more to follow. The UK has spent something around, the UK government has spent more than 400 billion extra this year. And the Bank of England has pumped in extra liquidity, almost 1 trillion. These are numbers that we couldn't possibly have imagined a year ago. And of course, if you take that across the world, this has been the biggest fiscal stimulus we've seen in our lifetimes. We say all governments are now Keynesian governments, spend, 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 just to try and get us out of this trough. Imagine it if governments had not spent so much money, we would be in a deep, deep depression. Thankfully, a global depression has been avoided. Absolutely. We had a global recession, but not a depression. A depression will be 2 years of falling GDP. We've also seen central banks around the world support governments, sharp falls in interest rates. The UK bank rate is now 0.1%. In some countries, they've gone to negative bank rates. On top of that, government bond yields, 10-year government bond yields, generally have fallen to their lowest value ever. Now, that's not true in every single country. Spain, for example, has still got quite high bond yields. In the UK, the bond yield is something like, I think it's 0.7%, 10-year government bond yield, government bonds providing a yield of 0.7%. Germany has gone into negative territory. So people are willing to park their money in the German government bonds, even with a negative yield. That gives you a measure of the concern about the future. And quantitative easing has been unprecedented, much bigger than in the financial crisis 10 years ago. And some governments have even paid workers wages. It's called furlough. Furlough, it means leave of absence. So we have several million people in the UK who have not worked for many months. The government has been paying their wages, or at least most of their wages, not 100%, up to 80%. Our furlough scheme is due to end at the end of April. We've got a budget coming on Wednesday. We expect the government to extend this scheme still further because there's a long way to go. Some governments have also provided inexpensive loans to companies, and some have even bailed out some sectors. For example, the German government has bailed out Lufthansa, the German airline, to stop it from going bankrupt. Again, around the world, the measures have been incredible. Who could have imagined this 13 months ago? I just couldn't have dreamt of it. Now, I suspect you've all heard about the so-called shapes of recovery. This is IMF jargon, which has been around for some time, but I didn't realize it would become so topical. This is now the alphabet recovery, shapes of recovery. The most prominent recovery that will take place in many, many countries is the V shape. The sharp fall last year will be followed by a sharp recovery in many countries. It's already happened in a number of countries of the world, but it won't happen everywhere at the same pace. I suspect a number of countries will have the right-hand side of the V will be rather flat for some years. And that's troubling, by the way. There's also talk about a U-shaped recovery where countries have gone down sharply and they will find themselves in a trough for some time before they return to the previous level. I hope it's not going to happen to many countries, but I think Brazil is caught in a trough at the moment. And then the W-shaped recovery is where down recover and we go up and back down again, particularly if we get another surge of the virus or a second lockdown. But we've already had that in the UK. We were expecting a double dip recession last quarter and this quarter. We just had a little bit of growth last quarter, a little bit of economic growth, but we are going to have another downturn in this economic quarter, January, February, March, because we're still in lockdown. I don't want to talk about the L shape. I always say L is hell. That would be a Great Depression. That would be a long-term decline. And I suspect there will be a few countries in that situation. I hope it won't be true, but it may be that a long-term decline becomes the new normal, where they have a sustained economic recession. But let's not talk about that one. I think the V shape is what we really want to hope is going to happen. And it is going to happen in many parts of the world, for sure. I'm going to show you data on this now. Here's the latest forecast from the IMF. They just came out in January. There are no more recent forecasts than this for the global economy. And you can easily check these yourself. I've just plucked this off the IMF website. And you'll see last year, the global economy, the global recession was a fall in GDP of 3.5%. But we have seen the sharp bounce back. We're expecting this year, the global economy to grow by 5.5%. And then slow down to 4.2% in 2022, and 4.2% will be a more normal rate of growth. So the global economy bouncing back this year. However, it won't be at this. Each part of the world will not have the same experience. The advanced economies in particular look like they're going to have a smaller bounce back relative to the fall last year. A fall last year of almost 5%. Will then be compensated to some extent by growth of 4.3%, and then back to more normal growth. Although 3% is still very good, by the way, for the advanced economies. But it's going to take a few more years before the advanced economies get back to where they were. In other words, they've lost a lot of economic activity, lost a lot of output. It will be a couple of years before they get back to where they started from at the end of 2019. So there'll be a loss of growth in between. The good news is, and I'm happy to say this, the parts of the world least affected have been the emerging markets and developing economies. Yes, and I'm generalizing now, using the IMF generalization. A fall last year of 2.4% will be more than compensated this year by a sharp bounce back as economies open up around the world. And I'll explain why in a few moments. And I think growth will continue into 2022. So I'm actually very happy to report this. And I hope that these forecasts turn out to be true. They're only forecasts. There is absolutely no guarantee of this. I'm cynical about forecasts, as you should be, but they are the best estimates we've got at the moment based on the latest information. Now, this is a really important slide. I need to explain it in a bit of detail. Again, it's the latest figures from IMF. What they've got here is the following. The dotted lines are the forecasts that were made at the start of the crisis, at the end of 2019 Q4. So take an index of 100. And the red dotted line is what we expected China to do in terms of growth over the coming couple of years. Now, you see China, and then the yellow line represents the emerging markets and developing economies, and the dotted blue line represents the advanced economies. So, but of course, none of that has happened. What has happened are the solid lines. And it's remarkable to look at this. China, which is the solid red line, had a sharp fall for only 1 or 2 quarters. And then by the second half of 2020, China bounced back. And by the second quarter of 2020, China was back to where it started at the beginning of the crisis. So China had a very sharp downturn and a very quick recovery, very sharp. And indeed, since then, China has begun to grow strongly. And you look at the forecasts show China by the end of 2022 will be something like 15% bigger than it was at the start of this pandemic. That is a remarkable forecast. I think all the signs are very positive for that to happen, by the way. The Chinese government can make it happen by spending a lot of money on the domestic economy. The advanced economies have gone down, and they've gone down further and down longer. And the advanced economies are not expected to get back to the index of 100 in general, perhaps by the end of 2021. And I think that's optimistic personally. And I think a number of advanced economies will not get back to where they started, or perhaps until 2022, 2023. I'll discuss that on my next slide. The emerging markets and developing economies, yeah, sadly, they've had a very big fall. Remember, the fall was, it could have been much worse, but some of them are bouncing back very strongly. These are IMF's latest figures. But remember, these figures are excluding China. That's the key message here. If you include China, you only get a very small drop. But when you exclude China, of course, it's been a much bigger fall. But the good news is, and I want to focus on the positive message, that the emerging markets and developing economies, excluding China, are expected to get back to where they started sometime in 2021, perhaps just after the middle of 2021, just after Q2 21. And that's good news. I hope it, I wish it was sooner, but I think it's quite realistic. Now, let me give you some details in terms of particular parts of the world. You can look at all these figures yourselves just by downloading the IMF World Economic Outlook. It's free of charge, so I look at it on a regular basis. In terms of the major advanced economies, I'm just going to pick out a couple. In fact, I'm going to pick out Spain. You could argue, is that a major advanced economy? Well, it is. I mean, it's not the biggest economy, but it is the one on this slide which has had the biggest fall in GDP, over 11% fall last year. And they will grow this year by 5.9, it's expected, but there's going to be a big gap here. They're going to fall behind for some time. The other point is, I want to point out the UK. Of the G7 countries, the UK has had the biggest fall in GDP. 1/10 of our output was lost last year, which is a serious blow to the economy. It's a very big blow to the government because it's also loss of tax revenue. And it's also a loss of our economic base because a number of companies are out of business permanently. We're going to grow this year, we think, by about 4.5%. And the government's own figures are very similar to this, by the way. The government's official figures put the recession last year at 9.9% and the growth this year of about 4.6%. So the IMF is very much in line with the own UK government's figures. And then stronger growth next year in 2022 as the pandemic eases. If I just take the next slide, and I'll take a few highlights. In particular, I want to highlight China and India. I've said it several times, it still amazes me to think that China, during the pandemic, during 2020, for the year as a whole, did not suffer a recession. The IMF's estimate, which is very accurate, suggests that China still grew by 2.3%. And they're expecting strong growth this year of 8.1 and slowing down a little bit. But, you know, growth of 5.6% forecast is still exceptionally good. And China doesn't want to overheat. The country that I'm beginning to spend a lot of time looking at is India. India, yes, had a very big recession last year, but it's going to bounce back strongly. India is a country of entrepreneurs with a political system that is very difficult to understand, more than 200 political parties, but it's a country of dynamism, a country of entrepreneurs. And so India is the one I would recommend you watch in future. I think it's the sleeping giant. It's going to creep up very nicely in terms of economic importance. It is becoming very important. I think it will continue. And of course, just want to mention Sub-Saharan Africa for obvious reasons. The recession last year was not very significant, and there will be a recovery this year and the following year. Okay, any recovery is good. I wish it was stronger, but it is good news nevertheless. So I'm sure there's a lot of data there to digest. And all of these slides, I'm going to send them to Professor Abor, and they'll be made available. But you can check this data very easily, as I say, on the IMF website. Let me now just then, talk about developing economies generally, and just briefly. I have got concerns for some parts of the world. There are some regions that have faced higher risks and will continue to face higher risks from this COVID-19 pandemic. And the regions are, and you will know better than I do, parts of Africa, particularly South Africa, have had a pretty hard time with this virus. Thankfully, I'm delighted to hear that Ghana has not suffered as much as some other countries. So I was very pleased to hear that today. Parts of South Asia and parts of Latin America, especially Brazil, are going through very tough times. Now, the reasons for some countries and some regions to have a tougher time than others, there are many, many reasons. There isn't simply one reason. Some countries have a lower health sector capacity, so a shortage of ICUs and a shortage of ventilators. And therefore, people who've caught this virus have not been able to survive in some parts of the world. Less access to clean water for washing of hands and so on is a problem. And I would dearly love to see much more access to clean water for everybody in the world. If you want to do anything for a village, give them clean water, please. It's so critical. And also, of course, many of the poorest areas of the world, many developing economies have been more vulnerable to global trade cycle. So we used to say, if America sneezes, the world catches a cold. Well, now if America catches the virus, the world catches the virus and it has an economic downturn, sadly. Exports from the developing economies and emerging markets are so dependent on the advanced economies, as you well know. I often wonder how blue skies are doing in Siwam, the fruit place. Very good friend of mine is the owner there, and I hope it's surviving, because they need to export. And of course, one of the big problems for many parts of the world is less access to the internet. And so education has gone online. It's been very difficult for many children around the world. And working from home has been a challenge for many people who've got less access to the internet. We are fortunate here this evening to have good internet, but in many parts of the world will not have the same luxury as we've got tonight. So unfortunately, this virus has hit different parts of the world in different ways. I want to talk about the following. I mentioned China several times, and I've described this as, I'm describing the changes in the balance of power in the world as the changing spheres of influence. I really would want you to think deeply about this particular point that I'm going to make. In my opinion, there are three dominant spheres of influence in the world. Clearly, the USA is a major player, a major sphere of influence. Now, under Trump's presidency, I would argue that the sphere of influence of America diminished. They became much more inward-looking, much more insular, and Trump, advocated many protectionist policies around the world. I'm hoping Joe Biden. We know from what he says so far, he is much more outward-looking. They've also signed the Paris Accord on the climate initiatives, and he's saying all the right things, I think, to open up the US again to trade much more than Trump. So I think the US will recover from that. The EU sphere of influence is very important. 27 countries, used to be 28 countries, but the UK has left the EU. Brexit has meant we're no longer part of the European Union. Now, the EU economically is approximately the same size as the US, but I think the EU is in a bit of trouble. With the UK leaving, its sphere of influence has diminished. And of course, economically, there are a number of countries in the EU that are struggling. We're beginning to see serious economic problems building up in Italy. They already were in Greece and Spain and Portugal. And this is before the pandemic. So they were struggling before the pandemic. And some of them really haven't struggled. They've struggled to recover from the global financial crisis 10 years ago. So I think the EU sphere of influence has diminished. Now, what I said about Trump, I hope will reverse. The EU will take some time to stabilize and to grow again strongly. And that leaves at least the way open for China and perhaps Russia. Remember, when I say sphere of influence, I mean China and the countries that are closely aligned with China. Now, I would like to put a proposal to you, or a prediction to you. I'd like you all to imagine that you are the Chinese government. We are the Chinese government. Let's just take this crisis as a strategic opportunity. Remember, China is the biggest holder of dollar reserves outside of the USA. They hold more dollars than any other country in the world, apart from the USA. Japan is number 2. They've earned these dollars from their significant trade surpluses for many years. They're sitting on a huge mountain of dollars. Now, you know as well as I do that China, for a number of years, has been investing around the world, buying up land, investing in commodities, investing in mines, etc., including in Ghana, by the way. You will know this as well as I do. They've been spreading their influence around the world. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying they've been expanding their sphere of influence. Now, here is my prediction. Remember, we are now the Chinese government. You've got to understand how Chinese people think. They think long-term. If you go into a Chinese restaurant, ask for what's called a century egg or a 100-year egg. It's a cliche, but it's a symbol of how they think. They think long-term. The Great Wall of China was not built in 6 months. Everything's about long-term future. And I believe that China is absolutely able and is willing to expand its sphere of influence by offering to help more countries around the world who are struggling with this pandemic. Now, I'm not being negative. I think this is also positive. China has the money, has the ability to help countries. And I think many countries will be very happy to receive help from China because they need help. So I am suggesting to you that China's sphere of influence is going to accelerate. It was growing already, but I think it's going to accelerate in the years to come. I think, therefore, we are going to see in the years to come further acceleration in the balance of power. And I think trade relationships are going to change. Trump give China a hard time, and maybe he was justified, blaming China for dumping, blaming China for unfair competition, blaming China for subsidizing. You can argue all of these points, but China now has an opportunity to diversify trade away from its dependency on the USA and to spread its influence much more globally. I think that will happen. You may not agree with that, but I think, speaking strategically, that makes sense. And let's wait and see. So when you get invitations from China to invest in Ghana, think long and hard. Is this good for Ghana long term? Or is this simply a short-term grab of commodities, of resources by China? I'm not being critical. Well, I'm being critical, but I'm trying to be strategic as well. We may want to come back and discuss that, by the way. And I have great respect for China. I think they've done remarkably well. Just the other day, the Chinese government has announced that they've now eradicated poverty in China. I don't know if you read about this recently, just a few days ago. They are reporting that they've taken 100 million people out of absolute poverty. Of course, they've given their own definition of absolute poverty. They define absolute poverty as £440 sterling per year of income. So what is that? About $550, $600 is their benchmark. And they estimate they've now taken 100 million people above that line, and they're now saying they've eradicated poverty. Well, I think there's a long way to go yet, by the way, but they're thinking long term about this. So in terms of summary, the global economy and the outlook, I think there's a lot happening. I think the global economy is going to grow this year significantly. Remember, the normal growth rate, if you take a long-term trend, the world economy grows on average by about 4% if you take a 25, 35-year trend. So we're going to grow above trend this year, which is not a surprise, because when you go down, you expect to see a V-shaped recovery. And next year, 2022, something approaching more normal. Although for the last 5 years, the world economy was starting to slow down a little bit. So 4.2 will be regarded as a positive, a very good figure, if it happens. There's been an upward revision by the IMF on the global outlook for two particular reasons. The vaccine rollout in the US is going well, and China is going well, and the UK is going well. And these are, some of the biggest economies. And of course, now we're seeing the vaccine being shipped overseas. And I just wish they would ship many more hundreds of millions around the world. I really do mean that. We're not out of this till we're all out of this. So we're going to have to, the richer countries are going to have to keep on pushing vaccines out to the rest of the world. The UK has been very greedy at taking a lot of vaccines, but we are now beginning to ship some overseas. And of course, we're going to continue to see fiscal stimulus in major economies because we're not out of it yet. As I say, we've got a budget here on Wednesday. The government's going to try and somehow slow down its borrowing and spending, but until we can open up the economy fully, there will be a number of people, a number of companies that are going to rely on government support. And the second positive message is we are going to see a significant uplift in global trade this year, subject to the pandemic. I keep saying that because there's been a huge backlog of demand, pent-up demand. And as airlines begin to fly more planes, as ships begin to travel on the high seas, we're going to see global trade pick up as those supply chains begin to reform and to start again. But the supply chains have been sorely affected. So there's a lot of pent-up demand here, which I'm hoping will be released this year. So exports from Ghana, I would hope, are going to rise sharply. That's good news for a number of your companies in Ghana. However, looking back at 2020, and this is a sad message or a sad reflection on last year. A number of sectors, a number of people have been severely affected, acute adverse impacts. And I wish this did not happen. Around the globe, women have been affected more than men. Now, the reason for this statement is very simply this. Women tend to dominate retail sector in many parts of the world. Think of Makala Market, for example, but shops and so on. Women tend to dominate in hotels in terms of, cleaning services and catering and so on. And many have been closed around the world. And women, as schools have been closed around the world, many women have stayed at home. So I'm simply making a point. Women have been more impacted by men around the world. The youth sector has been heavily affected, particularly because of the entertainment industries, hotels, restaurants, nightclubs, travel industries. That's affected the youth more, and the poor have been affected. And I don't know if you've read about it recently, but the evidence is very clear. The scale of inequality has increased. The gap between rich and poor has widened in countries and between countries. This is a crisis for the future. And the informally employed, casual workers, and those working in what are called contact intensive sectors, restaurants, hotels, nightclubs, cafes, bars, where you have contact between the customer and the person serving you. In many, many countries, there's been a tremendous closure of these sectors, and therefore people in those sectors have been hit heavily, particularly in the retail sector. I want to come back to this later. We say that the high street, if I can use that phrase, the high street has been decimated during this crisis, as many countries have closed their retail stores. In the UK, retail stores have still been closed. Bars are closed, restaurants closed, nightclubs closed, golf clubs closed. You can only go into the essential food shops and, for some reason, DIY stores. I don't know why DIY, but everywhere else has been closed down. Garden centers have been open because many garden centers in Britain, the shops that sell plants, many of them are also restaurants. They sell some food. But as I say, most retail outlets have been closed now for the last couple of months. Throughout the last 12 months, they've been closed for at least 7 or 8 months in total. Just to finish off my summary before I look at some other points, we're expecting the US and Japan to regain the level of economic output that they'd achieved at the end of 2019. In other words, they'll go back to that index of 100 sometime by the second half of 2021. So what that means, of course, is there will be 2.5 years of lost output. They will be down and back up, and will only get back to where they started by at least the middle of 2021. Again, put that in economic terms. It's a loss of tax revenue to the government, a loss of production, a loss of career progression in many cases, a loss of salaries for some people. The UK and the EU will be later. Some people think it's going to be the end of 2022 before they get back to where they started from. I'm not sure. I think it could even be longer. I think recovery for a number of EU countries and possibly for the UK is going to be slower than they expect or than they hope. And the consequence is we may end up with economic activity, economic output, not getting back to where it was until perhaps 3 or even 4 years after the start of this pandemic, which is quite an amazing thing to say. If you study economics, you can begin to think of the consequence of this, by the way, as I said, for tax revenue, for government borrowing, for the rollover of debt. But the good news is, believe it or not, in general, recovery has been faster than after the global financial crisis. The global financial crisis was deep but longer. Remember, it started in September 2008. I think many countries still haven't recovered from the financial crisis. Certainly not Greece, and certainly not Italy. That they've still been struggling with that. So this is going to be a bounce back, but perhaps not as fast as we would like, but it's faster than what could have happened, given what happened in the financial crisis. But so much, I've said this several times, and I need to say it again, so much depends on a vaccine and the slowdown in the pandemic. Thankfully, we're now getting more vaccines coming on market. So the Johnson & Johnson one came on just yesterday, the day before, in the USA, and the Johnson & Johnson is a one jab vaccine, and it doesn't need to be frozen. It will keep in a normal fridge. So that's the one that's going to roll out across the world very, very quickly. AstraZeneca is also very good, of course. It doesn't need to be kept in a special minus 70 degrees centigrade fridge, a normal fridge. The Pfizer, of course, as you probably know, has to be stored at minus 70 degrees centigrade. And if it's taken out of that, it will only last for 3 or 4 days, I think. I had a Pfizer jab. I was very pleased to have it because they had some spare. But you get whatever you're given, by the way, in the UK. My son is a professor in California. He had his first jab yesterday. Oh, I must tell you, academics in California are on the priority list. If you work in a university or a school, you're in a priority list. I don't know any other countries doing that. They're not in the UK, that's for sure. And he's got a second jab in 3 weeks' time. So he's going to
have to be on the priority list as well. Definitely.
You should be. If you're facing students, you should be on the priority list. And certainly in the UK, we're not facing students until we get the jab. So it's going to be a challenge. Now, here's 2 important topics, which takes me into the next part of this presentation, and it'll give scope for discussion. You know, I don't know how many have heard of this concept of a scarring effect. In economics, we tend to use a technical term called hysteresis. Hysteresis is derived from the Greek language. It means to fall behind. Let me explain what that means, and then I'm going to link it to this. You know, the longer you're unemployed, the danger is you may become unemployable because your skills may become redundant. That's what's called hysteresis. The longer a company is closed down, it may remain closed forever. Again, that's hysteresis. You fall behind. The longer somebody is sick, by the way, they may not recover, sadly. And so the longer an economy is in recession, economies, you know, if you're not investing in your country, if you're not investing in your infrastructure, it's harder to recover. And so this word hysteresis has now given way to the phrase scarring effect. If you cut yourself, when the cut is healed, you may have a scar. And so there is a view building up that this pandemic, even after it's over, may leave a scar on economies and on particular sectors. I want to talk about that in some detail. It's a serious point to note. And also I want to link that to the following question. Are there going to be any new normals? For example, is Zoom going to be the new normal? Are we going to have many more of our meetings on Zoom or in Teams? I think there will be a number of new normals, but not for everybody. Many companies and many people want to get back to face, but there will be a certain percentage of business that will remain online. And I think that's a good thing. You know, even if I can't travel to Ghana soon, at least we can have another Zoom presentation. So, you know, I think that we should use it, take advantage of that. I've said to my alumni office at Cranfield, you know, find out if any students live in Siberia. I want to give a lecture in Siberia. Why not? This becomes a new normal. And of course, we can apply that to many sectors. And I want to discuss that with you in a few minutes. Right. So this scarring effect, remember, it's hysteresis is the technical term. Scarring effect has now become the sort of journalistic term. And it simply means the following. We're seeing across the world, in many countries, unemployment has risen. I give you figures for the UK, but it's true in most countries. As unemployment goes up, there's a danger that it leads to higher unemployment, because as people lose their jobs, they don't spend as much, then other sectors are affected by their lack of spending. And therefore, the danger of permanently higher jobless rate. Let me give you an example of what I mean by this. And it's not good news for some people. I can visualize this, and I'm sure you can. If you think of the retail sector, the high street sector, much of which around the world has closed down. Not everywhere, it's all at different speeds, but many parts of the retail sector have closed down. Now, the people who work in those retail shops, you know, if they're temporarily unemployed, the question is, will those shops open up again? Many people are now shopping online. Perhaps not so much in Ghana, but certainly in most developed economies, online shopping is now the norm. I have not been to another shop apart from food shops for many, many months. I've not been to a clothes shop. I've not been to a car shop. I've been to DIY store because they've been open, but that's it. DIY and food. I've not been to a restaurant, etc., etc. Now, many of these businesses have gone online, and Amazon has boomed delivering parcels around the world. But the people who work in Amazon on computers or in warehouses are not the same people who work in shops on the high street. And there's a danger, therefore, if a percentage of retail spending remains online, there will be a percentage of people who will lose their jobs permanently. And I fear for their future. I am worried about that. We've also seen that working from home, I mean, the hope was we would all be more productive. I'm not sure the evidence for that is very strong. I certainly feel I'm more productive because I don't need to spend time traveling to work. But, you know, in many sectors, there hasn't been an increase in productivity. You know, you can put the camera on or off, computer on or off. Some companies, especially in the banking industry, insurance industry, consulting industry, many of them are now saying, we want you back, please. You know, because we need to make sure you're productive and earning money for the business. So slower productivity growth is a problem, and that may be a consequence of this pandemic. And mental health has become a crisis in many parts of the world, and that will also affect productivity, by the way. And countries which have a welfare system where the government subsidizes it, where the government helps people if they're unemployed, there's obviously been a tremendous increase in welfare dependency on a scale that I don't think many people could have imagined. And of course, this scarring effect, or this hysteresis effect that I mentioned, you know, is impacting different countries at different times, in different ways, and different age groups. So, you know, different countries, there's no doubt that the shift to online has affected the advanced economies much more. Different sectors, you know, I think education, some of it will stay online. Of course, I want to be face-to-face, but I think there will be a percentage will be online, and online is good. It's opened up education for many people. But age groups, you know, many young kids who've not been at school for many months, they've been affected by this. Their education has been affected, and that's a scarring effect for many kids. And so that leads me to the last major topic. What will be some of the new normals, you know, in different parts of the world? How will things change on a permanent basis as opposed to a short-term basis? And let me define a new normal. A new normal is not just a blip. It's not a quirk. It's a permanent change in behavior. You know, I remember years ago thinking that when digital phones, when mobile phones arrived, you know, there were a number of companies who just didn't spot the impact of mobile phones. One example was Kodak. Kodak, this global, well-known company that made cameras, they were the first company to invent a digital phone in 1984, but they didn't see it as having a future. So they didn't invest in digital cameras. And then suddenly along comes a mobile phone with a camera on it, and Kodak is dead. It's been decimated. They didn't see the new normal. And of course, if you apply that to all businesses, every one of us should be asking that question. Is it possible that my business will face a new normal, and am I ready for it? So examples, remote working may be accepted, not by everybody, but by some people and by some companies as a new normal. I can well imagine that. I've already given the example. I think some retailing will be online permanently, some retailing. I think some education will be online. And some financial services and some consultancy, but not all. Many will go back to normal, back to where they came from. And, remote working, really provides tremendous flexibility for the worker. You don't have to travel to work. You could work night and day if you wish, and that's not a good thing, by the way. But I'm quite certain that many of you online right now, you found yourself on your computer much more than you ever thought possible, especially academics. Academics are absolutely obsessed with Zoom. I love it. I've been on it today since 8:30 this morning. I have not come off it today. And that's not good, by the way. But, tomorrow I may take some time off. Of course, remote working means less congestion in cities. I don't know what it's like in Accra at the moment. But if many people are working from home, then Accra will be easier to drive through. London is almost empty, by the way. Not quite, but it's certainly a lot easier to drive in cities than it ever was before. It's nice to also enjoy the cleaner environment. And there's lower cost for business. Businesses, I suspect for some of them, they won't want to rent their expensive office blocks, their expensive buildings. And they're happy for workers to stay at home in some cases. And say the positive impact on health, the less pollution. Hopefully we're all taking more exercise. I wish I was, but I'm not at the minute because I've been on my chair all day, but I will tomorrow. The sense of cleaner air, the birds are singing. We talked a lot about this in the UK here. And globally, that's been a phenomenon. There's been less global pollution. We can now begin to see something positive happening here. And opportunities for digital learning. How many of us heard of Zoom before this pandemic? I doubt there were very many. It wasn't even called Zoom, by the way, before the pandemic. It was called Zoom Rooms. Now it's called Zoom. And as I say, for many of us, we've learned skills that we perhaps didn't expect to learn. Breakout rooms, reactions on Zoom, doing things that, weren't possible 13 months ago, or we didn't realize they were possible. And I think this has been a big stimulus to digital learning around the world, learning how to use digital more effectively, communicating with people around the world. Here we are tonight. I'm in the UK and you're in Ghana and maybe other countries. And that's a wonderful opportunity for digital learning in terms of learning from each other. But I've said this already, and I want to stress this. Not everybody is facing the same opportunities. There are those who are benefiting and those who are not benefiting. Clearly, it's easier for the more highly skilled workers to embrace this online environment. And most of us, we obviously have got a computer. We're using it right now, or a smart device of some form. But for many, many, many people around the world, this is something very strange to them. It's to them, it's they don't want to know because they've got a barrier to this form of technology, and it's understandable because they've never had any experience of it. And of course, differences by sector. Different organizations are finding it easier to go online than others. They're finding it easier to go digital than others. If you're working in the building sector, you can't go online. You can't build a house online. You got to go to a building site. If you're in manufacturing, you can't manufacture that car online. You got to go to the factory. So there are differences by sector here, and differences therefore by occupational groups. You and I, we're lucky. We have the luxury of being able to do these things tonight. But for many people, working in restaurants, working in shops, working in cafes, working in bars, working in care homes, working in hospitals, they can't go online and do their jobs. They've got to they've got to be face to face in their jobs. And as I said earlier, there are differences by income groups. The data that's being pushed out by the IMF and the World Bank and other organizations is clearly showing that the most negatively affected groups are those at the lower end of the income scale. And the ones who are least affected are the ones at the upper end of the income scale. And what that means, which is not, not a big surprise to say this, is the gap between the rich and the poor is widening. And I do not believe that's a good thing for the world economy, for any economy. As you very well know, in Ghana, a hungry man is an angry man. And we've got to make sure that we don't just ignore the plight of people who have not fared well in this crisis. They weren't doing well before it, and they're not doing well now, and we need to sort that out. And of course, the differences by country. I've already mentioned China has bounced back. The USA is going to bounce back. The UK will crawl back. Germany, I believe, will bounce back. Japan will bounce back. But it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. And I'm hoping you will tell me that Ghana is doing quite well. I'm hoping you're going to tell me that later when we have a Q&A. So on that note, let me summarize. And I'm going to leave plenty of time for discussion, questions. It's too easy to rush through a set of PowerPoint slides and say bye-bye. I hope you want to ask me questions, and I certainly want to have an open discussion with you. So my summary is this. Economic predictions right now and the statistics that are being published really are startling. Some of these figures, we could not have imagined them 13 months ago. Economies that fell by 15, 20%, bouncing back by 15 or 20%. These are just incredible figures. But remember what I said several times, in terms of the outlook for the global economy and for individual countries, so much depends on maintaining social distancing, getting this virus under control, and waiting until the vaccine rollout takes effect. It will take several more months, but if we let go now, if we simply go back to normal now, if we open economies too quickly, this virus, as we know, mutates, and the variants may well be out of control in the coming months. There's a lot of, every single day in the UK, we're talking about exactly this. The Brazilian variant has arrived in the UK at the weekend. We've identified 6 people with this new virus, but there's going to be more. And they're now checking whether or not the vaccine is going to be effective against the new variant. And there will be many, many more variants. Viruses mutate all the time. This is normal. The influenza every year, we have a different jab every year here because it mutates. This is normal. We just have to hope that this virus does not mutate into something that cannot be controlled. Nobody knows this yet. The scientists are reporting that they're optimistic. I hope they're correct, but let's wait and see. And economies have suffered tremendous falls in economic activity, and some will have swift recoveries, as I've said already. But so much depends on how successful the various policies are, the fiscal policy and the monetary policy, and of course, the success of the vaccinations I mentioned already. And finally, around the globe, government debt has exploded. As I say, the US just announced at the weekend another $1.9 trillion worth of stimulus package, just like that. Huge amounts of money. So government support has been absolutely critical, but government support has led and will lead to a mountain of government debt around the world. And at the moment, as I said earlier, this money has been raised by governments at historically low bond yields. Now, you can probably guess what I'm going to say next. If world economies do not recover fast enough, if inflation becomes a problem later, if risk becomes an issue later, then you all know as finance people that government bond yields will start to rise. Now, move the clock forward, let's say 10 years. And that's a long time, by the way. But when governments have to refinance the money they've raised today, they've raised the money today at historically low yields. But if bond yields double in 10 years and they've got to refinance, then we're in serious trouble. And of course, the refinancing will take place, continuously. not just in 10 years. I was just taking just the current borrowing, but the previous borrowing in previous years, the national debts have to be refinanced. And if bond yields start to rise again, then the burden of refinancing is going to be immense for many economies around the world. This is one of the biggest challenges for governments. On top of all of that, low bond yields are not good for pension funds because they rely on bond yields. So the affordability of long-term pensions will be challenged as well in many countries of the world. So on that note, I'm going to put these questions up purely to give you something to think about post this presentation. And also you may want to raise some of these as well. So do you think the COVID crisis will impact longer term economic growth and trade, and how? So think about that in the case of Ghana, for example, and other countries. And who will be the winners and losers? Which sectors are going to grow strongly? Which sectors will struggle? Which regions and which countries? I mentioned a few countries already, and why? These are the sort of questions that I'm pondering over at the moment. But on that note, Prof, I'm going to then just put this slide up and I'll come off sharing. And we've now got plenty of time. I deliberately have left plenty of time for Q&A, which I think is usually the most important part of any Zoom session. So thank you so much for giving me the time to say this, to share my views. I'm now going to stop sharing and come off the slides. Okay, I'm here.
Okay. Thank you. I think that for those of us who know how to use the emojis on the we want to go out there and give a very resounding clap for Professor Nellis.
Thank you. Akbe.
This has been an awesome, very insightful.
Prof. Akbe
Yo.
And I must just say that we climbed up in terms of participants to almost 500.
Whoa.
And I don't know what happened. I think there was either a trip or something, and the number dropped to 200 and started climbing up again.
Okay, but still very, very good. Well done.
Yeah,
glad to see so many online.
There was my last count was
that's brilliant.
458 or so before the trip.
Well, congratulations, Prof, for getting such a big audience.
So this has been extremely awesome.
I counted 466.
Yeah.
Okay, 466.
Oh, wow. Somebody asked, will there be a recording of today's session? I believe it is being recorded. So
we recorded, and after the lecture, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to, those of you who follow me on Twitter at JN Baole, I will share the link, and then I will share it on my Facebook wall as well. The University of Ghana Business School social media handles will share those as well. But the video itself will be uploaded on our YouTube channel, so you can have access.
Yeah, and therefore you'll see all the slides as well.
Yeah, those of you who are my friends on Facebook, it's being shown on Facebook Live, so the video will be available on Facebook as well. So thank you very much. So now, I have 4 hands already. I saw the very first hand to go up was our colleague, Professor Peter Cote from ISE. He's the director of ISE. ISE is the renowned research institute and he is the director, an economist himself, and he's my Manchester friend. So, okay. Professor Peter Cote, please, over to you, your question to Professor Nellis.
Thank you very much, Professor Nellis. Congratulations on this excellent delivery.
Thank you.
It was thought-provoking, and I think I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to start from where you virtually ended on the debt and revenue issue.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, and I want to relate it to developing countries like Ghana, where we're also having challenges with revenue, and then whilst we're facing revenue challenges, but our expenditure keeps going up because we need to buy PPEs, we need to provide support to health workers and other things to fight the pandemic.
Yeah.
Now, this has led to debt problems, and it's not peculiar to Ghana. I've seen the debt GDP ratio for UK is over 100%.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, 100% for US, for South Africa, and many others. And some have called for debt relief, especially for developing countries, that there is a need for debt relief. Given the picture you've also painted in the West, in developed countries, that they also have debt issues as well, do you think that that call for debt relief would really be successful? Do you think it's a just cause, and do you think that will be successful?
Peter, it's a great question and a very, very timely question. I am sad to say that I think a number of the richer countries may begin to pull back from their support for developing countries. And I'm sad to say that. As I say, we're expecting to hear more about this in the UK on Wednesday at our budget time, but there is already rumors flying around that the government is going to reduce its international aid program. And I think this is a disaster. It's understandable on the one hand, because the amount of debt is so enormous facing the UK government and the UK population. But, you know, at the very time when the developing countries need support most, I think it's going to be very challenging to get debt relief for some years to come, and I think many years to come. And I'm usually a very big optimist. My nature is optimism usually, but now I'm faced with some realism. And it brings me back to one of my earlier points. I'm trying to think like a Chinese government. I'm trying to think strategically. It's because the developed countries are going to have a debt mountain for many years, and I think they're going to pull back some of their support for developing countries. It's the golden opportunity for China to step in and help. Now, you may not necessarily want it, but I think China is ready, willing, and able to offer it. And it's going to be very hard to resist when countries are faced with those sorts of debts. So, Peter, I think it's a very timely question, a very important question. I hope that my negative expectations, I hope it's wrong, because I really do believe in a caring, sharing world. But I'm afraid I think some countries are going to feel under such pressure, some governments under pressure to balance their books. And let me you mentioned the UK, and it's true in many countries, not just the UK, but the debt mountain is so great. And I make my earlier point, the real danger will come if bond yields start to rise again. The cost of servicing and refinancing could be unsustainable. And that's going to be an even bigger problem. So, Peter, there wasn't much good news in what I just said, and I do apologize. I wish it was better news.
Yeah, right. Thanks very much. So that we can get a lot more conversation ongoing, I'm going to ask you, Prof. Nellis, if it's possible to take notes so that I take 3 questions in a row, and then you can answer them, and then we come back. I have some of the questions written down there, which I'll be reading to you shortly. Sure. But I will take Felix, I will take Obed, and I will take Gosson. So Felix, please unmute yourself, go straight to your question so that we can save a lot more. Hi, Felix.
Good evening, and thank you, Prof. The presentation.
Sorry, I am asking Felix. Felix, if you can hear me, go ahead. If I haven't your name, just hold on a while for us.
This is Mauli Felix Gomado, Prof.
Yes,
Mauli Felix, yeah. Go ahead, Mauli Felix.
Okay. On a lighter note, Prof. Nellis, I was in St. Paul Secondary School, and I was in House 3, which is named after you. So it's a real blessing to finally meet the great man. That's on the lighter side. Okay.
Wonderful.
To the substantive question. Governments, for the first time in history, spent a lot of money because of this pandemic. And definitely the monies were going to the productive sectors of the economy. So there were some real gainers. Now, my question is, what practical steps through economic policy can governments take when the situation normalizes to redirect some of this wealth from the hands of the high gainers so that it gets back to other like it's fairly distributed among the people of societies in the economies of the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me take Obed. Obed, Obed, where do you work now? Please introduce yourself quickly and go ahead.
Okay, Obed Atayebwa. I'm a journalist with the Business and Financial Times.
Okay.
So, good evening, Prof.
Hello, Obed. Hello.
Yeah. So, I think my network was on and off, but from what I heard from your presentation, if I'm right, you are projecting the impact of the pandemic to linger on for some time, especially for developing economies like Ghana. So in that respect, as a professor or as a professor of economics, what strategies and policies would you proffer for developing countries like Ghana so that the managers of the economy would put in place to aid in the quick recovery from the pandemic?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Clear question.
Question was straight to the point. Let me take Gosson. Gosson, can you introduce yourself and ask your question, please? And may we mute our microphones if we aren't speaking to the audience, please. So Gosson, you have the floor. Okay, so if I won't get Gosson, I would, from Nellis, I want to read one question. Helen, kindly mute your microphone. I'm struggling to mute your microphone, but I cannot do that. I don't know why. Helen, please mute your microphone. As an experienced professor of economics, would you agree largely that a situation such as this presents opportunities as well? Accordingly, what advice would you offer to Ghana as a sure means to seize the moment to rethink policy, restructure, and to reposition her on the globe? So let's take these three. I think you have three questions. The question that I just read to you is probably talking about how does Ghana reposition itself policy-wise, structurally, and to be able to take advantage of the opportunities presented by COVID-19.
Okay, and the last question is related to the second question from Obed as well. So these are big questions, and I'll do my best to give you. Jeff, mute your microphone, please. Jeff Osei, please mute. Okay, thank you. So the first question was about, those who benefited from this pandemic, and in particular, we've seen a number of companies such as Amazon, I mentioned, and Zoom. A lot of the digital companies have done very well. Someone needs, okay. So if you look at the NASDAQ, I'm sure you do look at it, the NASDAQ index in the US, the tech stock index, is at an all-time high. That's not a big surprise because the tech companies have done remarkably well in this pandemic. Now, here is a thought. Wouldn't it be nice if those companies that have done well paid more tax to help those that have not done so well? So I think we are going to see a number of countries around the world talk about, special increases in taxes, particularly for tech companies. Also, and I'm going to be very direct and very honest. Many international companies do not pay enough tax in the economies where they operate. You all, I'm sure, are aware of the scale to which profits are repatriated back to low tax havens. And I think that's not fair. That's not right. So I would sincerely hope that many companies will either rethink about their policies or their strategies to pay tax and pay it where it should be paid in the places where they earn the money. And I think a number of governments around the world have no choice. They're going to have to raise taxes. There's no doubt about this, by the way. Taxes are going to increase. But I am hoping that they will be targeted at those companies who've done exceptionally well in this pandemic. So I'm not against tech stocks. I'm not against Apple. I'm not against Amazon. I just think they're the ones with the very, very deep pockets. Now, the other point was about the impact on developing economies, including Ghana, and how this pandemic may linger for some time. And the question from Obed was, what strategies would I recommend for developing economies to help recovery? Wow, and that's linked to the third one. Again, I think, first of all, the domestic and international aspects of this question, these questions, you all know, as well as I know, that for any government in the world to spend its income wisely to help its economy to grow, you need to have a broader based tax system. So tax collection and the breadth of the tax system is absolutely fundamental. That's true in every country, but it's especially true in developing economies where the tax base may be very narrow. Only the formal sector is paying tax primarily. So I suspect that in all countries, including Ghana, there's right now is a discussion going on in government, I'm quite sure, about which taxes can they raise without damaging recovery, and which taxes should they not raise. I know in the UK, the most obvious thing that's going to happen on Wednesday, in our budget on Wednesday, it's almost certain. The easiest way to raise tax revenue is to freeze tax thresholds. This gives rise to fiscal drag. As incomes increase, people get pulled into higher tax brackets. That's the easy way to do it. I suspect many governments around the world will do this, and possibly in Ghana. I'm not recommending it. Don't criticize me for saying it, but it's unavoidable. I also think, and again, we're expecting to hear this, corporate tax is going to increase, I believe, around the world, simply because companies that have survived and are still trading, well, they're one of the few sources of tax revenue, and I can't see any way to avoid that. But my main point regarding a strategy for recovery, particularly in Ghana and other developing economies, I think it's going to have to rely on foreign direct investment. And I wish it didn't, because I can be very critical of inward investment from overseas. But given what has to be done, given the scale of investment required, I think there is a need to open up even more to inward investment. Remember, the cliche that economists use is a very important one to remember, please. Investment is the engine of growth. Investment in people, investment in infrastructure, investment in technology. Investment is the engine of growth. That's how you increase productivity. And of course, this pandemic, and I've said it earlier, has massively hit investment expenditure in many parts of the world. And I suspect that's also true in Ghana. I don't know for sure, but you can tell me if I'm wrong. As companies have delayed their investment, we need to stimulate that investment. Obviously, raising corporate tax doesn't help stimulate investment. So there needs to be some other incentives like capital tax relief on capital expenditure. There are many ways of doing this. I'm not a tax expert, but there are some obvious ways of stimulating and encouraging corporate investment. So in answer to the second question and the third question, I think you're going to have to attract foreign investment even more than you have done in the past. And that will mean offering deals to foreign companies, perhaps tax-free zones, free ports, perhaps no corporate or tax relief from corporate tax for some years, subsidized land, but be careful. Don't sell the family silver too cheaply. I'm not a big fan of modern colonialization. If you're going to have modern colonialization, it's got to be paid for at a full price. But if a country is in trouble, the danger is that you may end up doing deals that may not be the best deals in the long term. So be very careful. But I hope I've not offended anybody. I think it's very important to think long term, not just short term.
Right. Thank you very much, Godson. If you are.
Justice, may I say one more thing? I apologize.
That's fine, sir.
I want to say something that I've been saying for some years. but it is longer term. You know, around the world, a number of countries have formed trade blocs, NAFTA, EU, you know, Mercosur, and I know ECOWAS is a community of countries trying to support each other. I desperately want to see African trade blocs become much stronger and robust, because in so doing, then you can collectively drive, negotiate better deals with the rest of the world and negotiate better terms of trade. I was just teaching my own MBA students today and reporting how unfair trade has been for decades around the world against developing economies. So I'm a big supporter of fair trade, but I think that's going to require a number of African countries to form a strong unity of trade negotiation in order to get better terms of trade. Forgive me, Prof, for interrupting you.
No, that's fine, sir. That's why we are here. Godson, I'm not sure whether you can hear me, but if you can, and if you can unmute yourself, you may go ahead and answer your question, ask your question now. Otherwise, I'll go back to the chat room to post some of the questions that have been posted for Professor Nellis. This is from Afri, and they say, hello, Prof. It's been a wonderful presentation. Thanks. One, the Chinese economy is just about a third smaller than the US economy.
Yep.
However, the US dollar is by far the biggest reserve currency in the world.
Yep.
What are your views about the yuan becoming an important reserve currency?
Gosh, somebody must have heard my lecture today on this very topic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The second question says, what effect will the rise of the Chinese yuan as a reserve currency have on the US dollar?
Yeah, okay. So both questions are linked. First of all, the fact that the US is the main reserve currency in the world makes it very easy for the US. I think it's an unfair advantage. I'll say it bluntly. You know, the US, if you're an American, you don't care about the exchange rate. You know, if you earn dollars, if you borrow in dollars, if you repay in dollars, they don't care, because everything is for them is a dollar economy. It's the rest of the world who pays the price of the dollar reserve currency. The US can create more dollars, and the world still wants to hold those dollars, and it's an unfair advantage. So I am a big fan of multiple reserve currencies being used for international trade. I would love to see the yuan become a fully convertible hard currency, reserve currency. The yen is, but I think the yen needs to resurrect itself. I think the euro is and needs to grow as well. So I'd like to see 3 or 4 major global reserve currencies. Now, the issue about the yuan is a very timely one. You know, it's not by accident that the Chinese economy has huge trade surpluses around the world, because the currency is not fully convertible. The Chinese government for years has managed the value of the currency, and at times they've fixed it, at times they let it float a little bit, drift up, drift down, but they have kept it at a very competitive rate, which suits their purposes. It makes their exports very competitive. Now, if I were the Chinese government, I would do exactly what they have done. They are doing what they're doing for the benefit of the Chinese economy and the Chinese people. But as they expand, and they're now 1/3 of the US economy, as they become bigger and bigger, you know, in 10 or 15 years, the Chinese economy will be bigger than the US economy. It's growing at a trajectory that will overtake the US economy. And with that comes responsibilities. And I think one of those is to allow their currency to be fully convertible, hard reserve currency, so that the world can then trade in yuan as they do business with China. But as I say, China is very smart. They've resisted this, and they will keep on resisting it. They have an unfair advantage because they can maintain a low value of the yuan, and the US has an unfair advantage because they can print more dollars. So here we have 2 superpowers, both exercising an unfair advantage, and who's paying the price? The rest of the world is paying the price, which I think is absolutely wrong. I disagree with it fundamentally. So I'm a big supporter of the yuan at some stage in the coming few years becoming a hard convertible currency. But I wouldn't put a bet on this happening any day soon, because why would China do this? The world is still hungry for Chinese products, which are getting better and better in quality and are still very competitively priced. Why would China suddenly say, okay, we'll make things difficult for ourselves by letting our currency rise in value? That they wouldn't do this. So that's those both questions answered, by the way, but it's not going to happen very soon.
Thank you very much. So there's a question from Jessida, and Jessida's question appears to have been answered partly. I'm not sure if it's he or she, says, how does Ghana rely on domestic production to claim a place in the world economy? I think that you said some of those. But Benjamin says, it is imperative for African government to continue to give support to, is it imperative for African government to continue to give support to their people, knowing the long-term implications to the economies? What should they do to counter the future implications?
Yeah.
The second one, let me just give you one more so that.
Sure.
Cornelius says Ghana's debt to GDP is currently over 70%. Some advanced economies are doing more than 100% debt to GDP, and the possibility of debt relief, especially for developing economies, may not happen, according to you. What innovative solutions will you suggest for developing countries to ensure debt sustainability and raise local resources to support development during the second wave, or perhaps the third wave, and thereafter of the COVID?
I am really sorry to say that the future does not look so bright. This is a world crisis, a global crisis, a global pandemic. And I've said several times, sadly, some parts of the world are going to feel it more negatively than other parts. That is the reality. It wouldn't be what I would want, but it's the reality. And I think this issue of debt is not going to go away. It's not going to go away. I mean, you've had debt problems in the past. You've had HIPC and all the different aspects of debt relief, but this is not the same. This is a global crisis. And the consequences, I said earlier, I think, expecting relief from the advanced economies, the so-called advanced economies, is I think a bit optimistic. I think we're actually in danger of the opposite. And in particular, despite what I said about Donald Trump, his policies were to benefit, US workers. I think there is a danger that if this crisis continues and the debt problems of governments continue for many years, there's a danger that we may see an increase in protectionism, which will not benefit the developing world at all. That's a serious problem, which I hope doesn't happen. But, in the midst of these types of crises, countries tend to close ranks, tend to look more inward. Even China, is beginning to look more, well, it always has looked inward at its own country, by the way. It exports for the sake of its people, but it's looking for cooperation. But I think cooperation for China means it will become more dominant. So I think for developing economies, I go back to my earlier point, and I'm not optimistic. I said several times, I think we need to see African countries in general, and I hope Ghana in particular, to have a much stronger voice in world trade relationships. And how do you do that? Well, in very simple terms, you've got oil, but how much of that oil revenue are you actually getting? How much of it is going to the refinery companies? How much is going to the oil companies? How much is Ghana getting? I know this is now provocative. Same in Nigeria. I don't know if Nigeria has any oil refineries. They closed them all down some years ago. I think they're going to try and open some up. But in other words, the answer is you must add value to what you produce. Exporting, agricultural products is good, but you need to export processed, canned food. You need to add value. That's where the real profit is, by the way. I hope you don't mind me saying this. And I think, therefore, the strategy for Ghana and for any developing economy is to create more value and not just rely on commodities. Commodities are important, don't get me wrong, very important, but you've got to add value to that. The other thing that I'm delighted to observe over many years is the growth in the education sector in Ghana. And I don't say that just because I'm being hosted tonight by Legon, but because I've said it for many, many years. I think education is another engine of growth. And as people become more educated at all levels, so they can see the opportunities for entrepreneurialism, for adding value, for creating more value for the country. But I would keep on, this is a long-term issue, by the way, but you've done tremendously well in the last 10, 20, 30 years, but there's a lot more to do. And so I would invest heavily in education. I know the danger of that. The danger is you may start to export your talent. That is a problem. It's a problem that all of Africa faces, the export of talent, because as you know better than I do, the fastest growing continent in the world in terms of population is Africa. And the average age is getting younger. The danger is unless you satisfy people's expectations quickly, they will want to leave and go elsewhere. And so migration becomes a problem. We're now on a very emotional subject, but I desperately want to see Ghana do very well.
Indeed, Ghana is your second home, so we definitely want to do well. So you are welcome all the time to come back and again and again. I have one from Abdul Karim Aminu. He says, "Good evening, Prof, and thank you for the wonderful presentation. Please, since almost everything is moving towards online and the technology level in the developing economy is low, what are some of the impacts of the pandemic on the financial sector and some policies to mitigate the adverse effect?" And this is a very important question and probably want to associate with it. You just talked about education. We see that globally education has moved online. Here in the University of Ghana, colleagues had fought me off the idea that we had to move some of our programs online to create some comfort for our students. But of course, we've been forced online. And it looks like colleagues actually love it. So, but then we are faced with the challenge of the infrastructure, the infrastructure to support robust online learning and research and all other stuff. Of course, we cannot compete in this area, but I guess that's one of the things that you would want to comment on, how competitive developing countries can become, especially in education, knowing that for the past year or two, and probably a lot of students aren't going to be moving to the UKs and all of that, and also what should we do? Not sure that's a good question, but just to piggyback on the back of Karim. The second one that came from Thomas says, prior to COVID, all economic indicators are against Sub-Saharan Africa. With COVID still, all economic indicators are against Africa. What should we do to reverse this? Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, as I said several times, I don't have any simple, easy answers.
Absolutely.
We are all living in a very tough time in history. But I'm going to emphasize once again, my dream, my wish, my belief in the power of education. I've known Ghana long enough to know that the quality of education is very, very high. So there's no reason whatsoever why you cannot expand education and create successful businesses and create value from that. I'm confident about that. It's certainly possible, but as you know, and I know, it requires massive investment in infrastructure, building more universities, building facilities for accommodation, building lecture rooms, and as you said already, Prof, ensuring you've got the technology in place to take advantage of this new world. So investment in the internet, investment in computers is absolutely critical. Wouldn't it be sad? It'd be so sad if post-pandemic, that if all of this online learning, online business, online communication, if it then diminished because of a lack of investment in the infrastructure, this would be a disaster. And I just desperately hope that the government of Ghana and other African countries recognize this. And, you know, there are some tremendous opportunities. It was financial services was mentioned, and you've got a very healthy, dynamic financial sector in Ghana. But a lot of the software, as you know, is from South Africa, MTN software, and that's good. That's excellent. And that's why I go back to my earlier point. I think cooperation is going to be the secret of success. But you know, and I know that's not always easy to get cooperation between some countries. Listen, the UK has left the EU, so our cooperation is broken down there. So it happens all over the world. But, you know, you've got people who can deal with this. I think that the future could be bright, but I have to say again, for everybody on the planet, apart from the Chinese and apart from the US, the Americans, I think we're going to go through a generational problem here. And let's not forget, you know, the future belongs to the young generation, and we have to make sure we invest in it for their benefit, you know, not to the benefit of the older generation. And that is a big concern. So you got to keep on investing in education.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you the last one, and then after that, there have been a few comments here that were directly made to celebrate you. For example, there is the SPACO group of students who are really proud about you, and they associate with your success. And
I should have worn my SPACO. I've got a SPACO blazer. I should have put it on.
Don't worry, we will do another one. We'll do another one where we get you. And we will put the all SPACers, all SPACO people should join, so they can all join. So I'm sure that we get another opportunity. But your friend, Lawyer Adulabi, has said, thanks for the very educative lecture, Joe. Certainly, ending the crisis is going to be a process rather than an event. The balance between the supply side and the demand side need to be handled with care. And I certainly agree with that. There is one that says it appears a lot of central banks, and this is to you, Joe, you may want to throw a little light on that. A lot of central banks around the world are expanding money supply to try to mitigate the effect of the pandemic.
Yep.
At what point do they begin to pull back? What does that mean for the inflation and cost of debt when this happens? And what would that mean for the global economy, particularly for developing economies?
Great question.
Yeah.
Absolutely spot on. The expansion of the money supply by central banks is known as quantitative easing. And for those of you who are not aware of what this means, let me explain it very briefly. The central banks have intentionally gone into the financial markets and bought government bonds. They bought the bonds that are held as reserve assets by pension funds, by corporates, by commercial banks, etc. That's an intentional strategy. The reason is, by going into the market to buy the bonds, they've driven up the market price of bonds, which of course drives down the yield on bonds. And I said earlier, bond yields are at record lows. This was deliberate, this is intentional. This is what's known as quantitative easing. But the problem then is what happens, two things. What happens to all of this liquidity in the system? What will it do to inflation? Now, at the moment, this massive injection of money, liquidity into the system around the world has not generated much consumer price inflation yet, but it has generated asset price inflation. Look at the NASDAQ, look at the stock markets around the world, look at property prices, look at bond prices, I said. So we've got asset price inflation has gone sky high. At some point in time, when this process is reversed, when the central banks begin to begin to unwind quantitative easing, are we going to see the money, as assets begin to peak and start to fall, are we going to see the money go into spending again? And will there then be in retail or in consumer inflation? I'm going to say something that's hard to prove, but I don't think there's any time in history where we've had this scale of monetary expansion without inflation taking place. I don't think there's any time in history. I may be wrong. I'm thinking about Germany, interwar years, they decimated their economy by printing money. We think of Zimbabwe, some years ago, the economy collapsed. We think today of Venezuela. We think of Brazil during the 1980s and many other Latin American countries, printing money ultimately. And you, by the way, I know Ghana very well. I know what happened in Ghana also. You had a new CD and a new CD. You kept, taking the zeros off. I remember it very well. So there's no country that I'm aware of has managed to avoid inflation with this scale of monetary expansion. So there is a danger now, because as the risk of inflation rises, so the risk premium on bonds will rise and the cost of borrowing will rise. And there we have a debt mountain building up and a debt crisis. As I said earlier, and I'll say it again, most people who know me regard me as one of the most optimistic economists, but I probably sound tonight like one of the most pessimistic economists tonight. But I'm still optimistic relative to the real, the real pessimists. If you hear some of the people that are out there talking about this, they are predicting a massive crisis of inflation coming along. I just hope that global competition keeps prices down. I hope that we keep investing to maintain productivity, and therefore we don't need to raise prices. But all of this will become clear in the next, I think, 3 or 4 years. Right. There's a risk building up for many of us, sadly. I'm lucky, and that I'm at a different stage in my career, but for some people it may be very challenging.
Yeah.
And in Ghana how difficult inflation has been in the past. I know very well.
Yeah.
I remember it very well. My salary in St. Paul's, Spaco, in 1976-78 was approximately 325 cedis. It would have bought me then about 150 yams a month. You can't eat that many yams in a month. Today, what is the average salary and how many yams can it buy? And I'll bet you it won't buy that many yams.
Yeah, definitely.
Inflation erodes the value of money.
Right, it does. So we will bring it to the end here, except that I have Martin texting. Martin, your hand went up at the wrong time. But so I am a very liberal moderator. So I'll give you the last word. And please, if you can make it direct so we can bring it to an end. I'm sorry that, Martin, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Good evening, Prof.
Hi, Martin.
Right. Thank you very much. My name is Martin Texan. I work with GES, and I also work with Investor Capital. Good. This is the issue. I think the Western world have treated Africa with kid glove over the years. We've always felt sympathy for Africa. Don't you think COVID is an opportunity for Africa to rise out of the woods when most European countries and most Western countries try the protection system to protect their economy? Don't you think this is an opportunity for Africa to step up, create value, add value to their commodities, and get out of the woods and become more independent?
Well, Martin, I 100% wish for this to happen. So it's an opportunity. The question is how, and what, will Africans and will Ghanaians rise to achieve this? So I like what you say. I like the sentiment, but making it happen is critical. It requires the political will. It requires, the tax revenue to be available. It requires funding to be available to make it happen. But I would support this vision 100%. But a vision doesn't mean reality. And therefore, I'm concerned that we may raise hopes. But I do take your point. And you made a point that I've made as well. Let's focus, please, on added value. Let's focus, on creating more value from what we produce. Not just commodities are important, but the real income comes from value added. And I agree with that, Martin. Thank you very much for your point.
Thank you. And just so we are informed, all of us, there were almost 500 of us here. All of us have a role to play in getting our economies to be able to resist, quote unquote, the oppressor's rule by paying our taxes and making sure that we do the right things. Unfortunately, we don't usually like to pay taxes. Recently I was in outskirts of Accra, and I slept in a hotel and paid them money, and they gave me a receipt. It wasn't a VAT receipt, and I asked, "Where is the VAT receipt? I paid you tax. I want the money to go to the government." They had no tax receipts, and so that is what happens to all of us.
I know.
We want to cut corners. In the end, unfortunately, we are unable to elsewhere, it is tax money that builds the
Yes.
economies. Yeah. You know, do you want to have some closing comments?
I do.
Yeah.
I've been absolutely delighted. I'll say again, at being invited to give this presentation. I never expected to see so many people online, and I'm honored by that. And I saw a number of comments from Spaco boys and girls. So, and I just want to check, did somebody online, did somebody say that I taught them at St. Paul's? Because if I did, you must be very, very old.
No, he said he was in your
the Nellis block, the Nellis block. That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah, block 3. Yes. But I may have taught some of your children, by the way. It's a great honor. You know, as I say, Ghana is my second home. I don't think I will ever stop going there. You know, as soon as this pandemic is over and I'm able to fly, I want to get over there as quick as possible. But I also want to always visit Legon, because I've been going there for many years. I've enjoyed my visits at the university. And so I hope to see you all soon. And please stay safe, take care. This virus is a nasty thing. I've had a number of friends who've died, and it's been really traumatic. One of my friends, 3 brothers died in one family, and they were healthy men. So this can hit anybody very hard, very quickly. So please take this seriously and respect this virus, but let's beat it together. And one day we'll all sit down, have a star beer or a club beer, whichever is your preference. I don't mind which it is. Some apetashi is also acceptable, and palm wine. And on that basis, I would simply like to say, God bless our homeland, Ghana. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's put our hands together wherever we are, show appreciation. So, you know, yes, a clap. Yes, thank you very much.
Prof, thank you very much.
I want to invite Professor Bo. Professor Bo, do you want to make some quick comments? Are you there?
No. Then go ahead.
All right. So let me, on behalf of the management of the University of Ghana Business School, and on my own behalf, say a big thank you to you, Prof. Nellis. This was at a very short notice, and the deep insight that you have shared have conveyed how much energy you have put into preparing for this lecture, and we definitely appreciate that. The business school hasn't given up on you, and so there are a number of things that we are doing to make sure that as soon as the pandemic is over, we can get you here.
Right.
We are jealous that the students in Cranfield are getting you alone. We want our students to be exposed to the deep insights and knowledge you bring, and so we are just hoping that this COVID will be over, and then we will get you back to Ghana one more time.
Thank you very much.
Now and then, we want to say a big thank you and say that we really appreciate you are spending time with us. Ghana is really blessed, and the insights you have shared are so broad-ranging and absolutely very important for us if we have to be able to navigate our way through the clutches of COVID-19.
Yeah, thank you very much.
As a university, you said something that really hit me. We got pushed into this, just like anybody who gets pushed into a pond full of crocodiles. I think that we need to just put in a lot of effort in making sure that we come out of this, but not just that, but we come out of this strong enough to be able to say when COVID struck, we were able to do something that will live several generations after us.
Yeah.
And these lessons, I think, are very useful lessons for us. I want to thank you very much. And for our participants, I'm extremely grateful for your participation. Almost 600 people, 500 people attending and staying through. But for your presence, this would have been just a conversation between academics, but students, journalists, there were high profile people in our society who took time to come and listen to the conversation. And we thank you for the company, but also that you are mindful to come so we share ideas on how, as a country, we can navigate through the experiences of COVID. Let me say thank you once again and wish you a very blessed evening. And as Prof. Nellis said, these are bad times. Let's stay safe and let's live to the next day so we can have a story to tell of our the future generations of what the situation was like during COVID. I thank you all, and I wish you a pleasant evening. Good night.